As an action film, Road Warrior is second to none. The battle scenes definitely win this reviewer's vote for the best chase scenes of all time. Motorcycles crushed under the wheels of an oil tanker, cars being flipped over or smashed into oblivion, men leaping from one vehicle to another at high speed, deaths from shotguns, flamethrowers, arrows, flying blades, petrol bombs, and of course a truly breathtaking head-on collision between hero and villain. This film is a triumph of choreography, stunt work and editing, and it succeeds without the corner-cutting aid of modern digital effects. Everything you see actually occurred in front of rolling cameras. The action manages to thrill without distracting from the story, and, while being relentlessly violent, it maintains an unusually shocking realism. You see, most action movies sort of let themselves down by showing us forms of violence that we know could never really happen that way in the real world. The heroes often have a magical ability to dodge bullets, can take dozens of punches in the face without having a bruise to show for it, or they have superhuman acrobatic skills. Such action choreography often comes off more like a gymnastics dance routine than an actual fight. But with Road Warrior, pretty much all of the violence is believable. The only major exception being Wes's pain resistance and lack of long-term damage to his arm, or the feral kid and his boomerang. But both of these characters are symbolic anyway, so we'll get into those subjects later. Road Warrior is also unusual as an action movie in that it saves nearly all of its action until the last 15 minutes of the movie, and then lets rip with one massive and breathtaking chase scene. It doesn't do a Fury Road and try to blitz its audience with action scenes all the way through, because it doesn't need to, the story is good anyway. And the careful effort to make the violence believable ironically makes the action scenes more dramatic than in most other action movies. But the end chase scene is also carefully thought out in the respect that the level of violence seems to escalate gradually. We start with a couple of minor petrol bombs, car crashes and arrow killings, then we get shotgun blasts, bigger crashes, and fighting on the cabin itself until we reach an absolute belter of a finale, the mashed body head-on collision between the tanker and the humongous vehicle, which is a showstopper moment. Another thing I find particularly interesting and unusual is that the violence in Road Warrior comes off as being quite deliberately horrific. There's rape, torture, severed fingers, shotgun blasts to the face, crushed bodies. It is barbaric. Most action movies present violence as being something hip and cool, the embracement of that feeling sports players get when they defeat an opponent team. But violence in real life is ugly, brutal and terrifying. To its credit, Road Warrior, even in its good guy saves the day ending, presents the violence of the story as something to be feared. The film is especially helped in this respect by Brian May's excellent score, which at times sounds more like a horror film than an action film. At the same time, the score combines rhythmically with the engine roars and other impressive sound effects, rather than just sounding like a bog-standard musical overlay. Another important feature is that all of the action scenes are relevant to the characters and serve a narrative purpose. There are hardly any violent scenes whatsoever in which the film appears to be simply throwing violence into the mix for the sake of it. The opening chase scene establishes a confrontational relationship between Max and Wes that will play out right until the very end of the final chase scene. The boomerang scene establishes how brutalized the feral kid is and provides further motivation for Wes to spiral even more out of control. The first rig chase provides the means for the camp occupants to escape and motivates the Humongous and his followers to become even more hostile, and so on. Far too often action movies seem to just abandon their narratives for the sake of squeezing an action scene in before getting back to the story. And Road Warrior also shapes its action scenes around the resource limitation themes of the story, the unavailability of bullets being a key factor. Max spends most of the movie with an unloaded gun and only fires a few shots at the end of the movie. And out of the Marauders, only the Humongous has a gun. This works better than going for bullet spree overkill. Concerning the realism of Road Warrior's action scenes, I was quite surprised to discover that the script for the film, which is posted over the Internet Movie Database, featured some stark differences. Most of the dialogue scenes in the script are near enough the same as what is in the finished movie, but the tanker chase ending was very different in the script and arguably quite ridiculous. In the script, Papagallo survives, and it's actually Wes who kills the Humongous out of anger after discovering that the tanker is full of sand. The feral kid is also much more directly involved in the action scenes, but in stupid ways, like dangling from the gyrocopter on a rope as he swings back and forth. And it finishes with Wes kidnapping the feral kid and Max coming to the rescue. And I think the sort of idea of that was supposed to be that if Max didn't save the boy, then the kid would either be sadistically killed by Wes for having killed his golden boy lover earlier, or that Wes might keep the feral kid as a future sex slave replacement for his lost lover. But it all didn't read very well to me, and so it seems that the last stage of script development involved a very wise rethink of the entire end chase sequence. To round off this opening section of the analysis, I'd like to point out that Mad Max 2 has an important feature that was common to many of the best action movies of its time, but has become near extinct in modern action films. And that is that the characters actually show signs of believable intelligence. Firstly, this comes across in the brief tactical chess game between Max and the gyro captain. Gyro has placed a deadly snake on his copter to kill any approaching thief, but he's also taken the backup step of burying himself in the ground nearby, having covered up his footsteps. Effectively, it's a two-layer trap. It's not the most elegant plan, but it's effective, being that anyone approaching will just assume that the snake is the only danger. The script also describes that Gyro has a kite flying which is attached to the copter to lure in distant enemies. He outsmarts Max initially, but Max has his own two-layered backup plan. By announcing the presence of a bomb under his car, he entices his opponent to make him switch it off, at which point he can retrieve a weapon for a surprise attack. But Gyro is cleverer than he looks. He anticipates the first layer of Max's counter-trap, but then is fooled by Max's second precautionary measure of having a quiet but well-trained dog ready to attack anyone who touches his car. This is really well thought out stuff. It shows that both the lead hero of the story and his opponents are resourceful and cunning, but most action movies get the balance all wrong by making the hero vastly superior in intellect and abilities and their enemies idiots. Or often, both the hero and the enemies are idiots. The steep intellectual imbalance approach works for family-friendly action such as James Bond, but for a violent and adult-orientated action movie, lessening the intellectual gap between heroes and villains is far more effective. It creates a sense of uncertainty about the likely outcomes of conflict, and thus results in a more tense and engrossing storyline. Although the gyro captain turns out to be a good guy, and is actually a really likeable character from the beginning, the balanced intelligence approach from his introductory scene is carried forth throughout the film. We're shown in many more details that Max is intelligent and resourceful. He uses his empty shotgun to scare off approaching enemies or put captives in their place. He has pre-prepared camouflage nets to hide both himself and his car when spying on the compound, and he can pick locks. He even has a tripod for his binoculars. But as well as displaying his general intelligence, some of these details also depict the careful emotional shield that he has created around himself to keep everyone else out. We're allowed in the opening scenes to assume that Max can outsmart everyone, But then his plan to retrieve gas from the compound backfires, and we get to see that the marauders have very quickly captured all the vehicles that tried to escape the camp. We can see that they are organised and brutal and led by a man who is capable of brute force tyrannical leadership, but is also skilled at emotional manipulation and deceptive diplomacy. He very nearly persuades Papagallo's plan to walk out in the open where they will all be sadistically killed. But luckily for them and Max has information to bargain with, and he delivers the rig. So having outsmarted both Wes in the opening scenes and now the Humongous, Max now underestimates his enemy, not anticipating the super high-speed mechanisms of the Humongous's vehicle or Wes's determination to catch the fly that got away from him twice before.
You can run, but you can't hide!
Max is easily defeated and very luckily survives. By the time we reach the end chase scene, both Max and his key enemies, Wes and the Humongous, have been established as being intelligent, cunning and determined warriors. Although the script goes slightly further by revealing that the marauders can communicate with each other in Morse code using mirrors to reflect the sunlight. And Max isn't even the toughest guy in the film. This incidental bad guy manages to avoid falling off the rig even when shot with an arrow, and both Wes and the Humongous would annihilate Max in a fistfight. This is all very effective story design because it shows that the hero of the film is not invincible and that he isn't magically protected from harm by the scriptwriters. So it gives the end chase scene an "it could go either way" framing, something very few action movies manage to establish. Even the compound occupants, despite being portrayed as rabbits to the slaughter, show their own bits of strong intelligence. Attaching a bulletproof protective hull to the rig is simple, yet unexpected, and their switching of the gasoline for sand outsmarts everyone, including the audience. As well as making for a more tense cat-and-mouse storyline, the intelligence shown by multiple characters in the film actually makes the story more believable. Far too many movies of all genres are looked down upon by audiences because they are able to think of more intelligent things that they would do if they were in the shoes of the characters. But with Mad Max 2, that's not so easy. About the best idea I could come up with for defeating the marauders would be to have some of the compound occupants go out on nighttime stealth missions to lay traps such as littering the nearby roads with sharp tire-bursting objects to render the enemy vehicles immobile, or to leave poisoned food and water laying around for the hungry marauders to find. A good action movie should always take into account the fact that audiences will be asking themselves what they would do in the shoes of the characters. In fact, that applies to all genres, with horror being the one that gets it wrong most.